Hi there, this is Joshua. It's January 2025, and I'm recording an updated walkthrough of the agent service toolkit that I launched on GitHub about 6 months ago. I really want to thank everyone who's provided support for the project. A lot of encouraging words on the original YouTube video here on GitHub, and people reaching out to me directly. So I want to say thank you to everyone who's left comments, added issues and discussions, and asked questions. I also really want to shout out the contributors. We've had 10 folks contribute to the template, including some really meaningful contributions. So a huge shout out and a lot of thanks to those folks. We're definitely continuing to look for more people to contribute and really appreciate that. So what is this project? So basically what this allows you to do is take the existing toolkit and very quickly start iterating on your own agents built with LangGraph. And it provides a fast API service, a client, a strong schema, and a Streamlit app for a user interface that you can just kind of take out of the box for building your own agents and iterating really quickly. And I built this because I was trying to play around with some of my own agents and use cases and just kind of understanding how some of the frameworks worked. And I found that the kind of hosting and serving part was a little bit more complex than I wanted it to be. And there weren't really any great existing tools that I could find that didn't involve uploading my agent code to some third-party service and kind of being locked into what they provided. So I was interested in creating something open source that would allow people to do that locally themselves. Um, Let me talk a little bit about just the architecture of this toolkit. So the core is the LangGraph agents, and you can actually maintain multiple agents in the service now. Those are wrapped by this fast API service, which kind of runs typically in its own process or container alongside of all the agents and exposes a bunch of APIs for doing streaming requests if you want to kind of see what the agent is doing as it's happening, as well as kind of a one-shot like invoke and just give me the final response. There's also metadata endpoint, the ability to link it up with feedback and manage that through the service and other things. And then there's a Python client that's provided. So if you want to build your own Python application using a different UI framework or build it directly into a a non-UI service, it's very straightforward to do that. Of course, you could also interact with the APIs through JavaScript or anything else that you like. I haven't done that, but you'd be able to. And then I built a Streamlit app that lets you also kind of have an out-of-the-box UI for interacting with your agent and also something that you could customize. So the end user would typically be interacting directly with that Streamlit app. The agent would also be making calls out to an LLM provider typically or a model that you're running locally. And that's what's covered by my video here in the diagram. So what are some of the features of this application? So as I mentioned, you can have multiple agents, the fast API service and streaming. I've also implemented content moderation using LlamaGuard if you integrate with Grok in one of the agents if you want to add that. Everything is asynchronous, so it heavily uses the Python async framework so that it can support parallel calls, concurrent requests, and things are non-blocking. There's a LangSmith integration. It also has kind of out-of-the-box Docker support. So I'll demonstrate how easy it is to kind of run and iterate locally using Docker. Of course, you can also do that locally too. And I've built out a ton of tests as well to make this easy to kind of iterate and continue to add new features without regressing existing features. We're at about 70% test coverage right now, which I'm really proud of. Okay, I don't think there's anything else here. So yeah, let's jump into a quick demo. So what I'm going to show here is a Streamlit app, which is hosted in Streamlit Community Cloud. It's interacting with the agent, which is running, in this case, on Azure. So I'm hosting it with Azure App Service, the Fast API part, and the LangGraph agent separately from the Streamlit Cloud. And these two services are interacting with each other. So first, I'll just show a couple of the configurations that are possible with this. So there's actually a bunch of LLMs that are supported. On this instance, I've only added keys for Grok and GPT, but it also supports Gemini, Claude. We just added DeepSeek, a few other kind of model providers, and this is set up kind of dynamically based on which API keys you've provided. There are also multiple agents that are built in. So by default, it uses the research assistant, which has access to web search and a calculator, but there's also a simple chat bot and this background task agent for kind of longer running tasks, kind of demoing that feature. And again, you can do the streaming on or off. And so for this, I'm going to just start with a question that will use both the web search and the calculator. So how many times do I need to stop and charge when driving from Oakland to Pittsburgh in a Honda Prologue, which is an electric vehicle? And I'm going to prompt the LLM to actually check and use the calculator because sometimes it will just run itself. And let's see how this works. So it's making a couple of web search calls to find out the information that it asked about the distance and the EV. Based on that, it has determined that it's about 2,571 miles. The EV should run about 296 miles. And then it's done the calculator and it's given us links to both of the sites that it used to generate those. So this is a great answer. So I'm just going to go ahead and 5-star that, and it should capture the feedback. Yep, it did. And in case I wanted to save this for later use, I can actually get an ID for this thread, which is being stored on the back end, and I can copy that and actually reload. Okay, it's now gone, but if I use that URL, it should retrieve my earlier conversation and it's back. So I could ask follow-up questions or get back to this information if I wanted to with some of the statefulness features that are built into LangGraph. Cool, okay. So let's jump into the code a little bit. You can see that I'm using cursor here and talk through some of the capabilities in the app and what it's doing. So first I did want to mention, I'm also using UV for the package management and dependencies. I love UV. I've been so happy with using it. I would definitely encourage any new projects to use it. And basically it's got a lock file with the very specific versions and helps to manage that. And it's extremely, extremely fast to install and set up dependencies, both in Docker and locally. So it just saves a ton of time. You can see there's quite a lot of packages here for all the different LM providers and other things. So it really just saves a lot of time with that. And yeah, okay, so where do we want to jump in? So to start with, so this uses the source layout. You can see the Streamlit app kind of at the top level that I mentioned. And so there's quite a lot going on here. There's a sort of a draw messages that's managing all the chat messages, the feedback, and then kind of a main loop that's setting up the overall structure, doing configuration, setting a little bit of HTML, and then kind of, doing all the setup, setting up that sidebar and the configuration, and then running the kind of core message loop. That is interacting. If we jump down and look at the actual LLM calls, which are near the bottom, I think. Here we go. So whenever it's getting a new user message, it's keeping that in the session state. And then you can see it's using that client to do the streaming or the invoke call to actually call the LLM. So that's sort of nicely encapsulated. You can see that this client is really useful for kind of a simple setup and interaction. So I can create it just with a base URL, get information about the agents that are available, and then invoke it very easily with a model and a prompt to get back a simple response. So this is just a super simple way of interacting with it in your own code. And yeah, all right, let's jump into, actually I can show that client code a little bit. So it's using HTTPX to manage the interactions, the request and response. And yeah, you can see all those methods defined. So that's great. There is a common schema for that's built with Pydantic, so some models about agent information and metadata, as well as the basic kind of input from a user for both the invoke and the stream endpoints, and then the ability to get these chat messages back from the LLM. And there's quite a lot going on there to support some of the different kind of custom things. And so everything is really built on this schema. It's shared across the client and the service to make things easy and consistent. So what's going on in the service? As I mentioned, it's a FastAPI service um, that has all these endpoints. There is some basic authentication that's supported, basically just using a header secret, like a bearer token. Of course, you could also add OAuth 2 or other kinds of things on top of this. I just haven't built it in. Um, it's using SQLite to store kind of conversations and multiple turns, which is how we were able to retrieve that thread in the demo. I've got that info endpoint, which is kind of showing the available models and the available agents. And that's what the Streamlit app calls to generate the list of models that we saw at the beginning or in the demo. And then these invoke endpoints, which are doing some conversion and actually invoking the underlying agent. And you can see that, and then some of the logic that is involved in the streaming, which is a little bit more complex. Definitely took some work to get that set up. So hopefully it's useful to you for the streaming endpoint. The feedback, I can retrieve chat history to kind of pre-populate based on a thread ID as we showed, and then the health check. So that's the app, or that's the service. So that's really kind of a lot of what the toolkit provides to wrap the underlying agents. Let's see, we didn't look at the core, but yeah, we're also using Pydantic settings to manage all of the settings for the application. So you can use a .env file, environment variables, and other kinds of things, and it figures out the available agents based on the API keys that are provided, and provides kind of a simple interface for interacting with LLM based on an enum, which can be used in the agents. So for the agents themselves, I've got this agent subdirectory with several agents implemented, and then a little bit of kind of wrapping and support around that. So one key thing to point out is this agent/agents file. And this is kind of got a dictionary and the caller methods to kind of retrieve an agent, which is used by the service. So if you're modifying agents or adding your own agents, you would want to add them to this dictionary using this agent struct or data class, and then it will become available to the service and be exposed in that info endpoint, and you can specify when you're calling the endpoint which agent you want to use. So let's look at just a couple of examples. So this is just a simple chatbot, so it's about as basic as you can get, basically pulled from one of the LangGraph quick starts. So it's just got the model, it's just taking the input, calling the model, and returning the response. That's basically the entire thing. So this is about the simplest example that you could start with. And then on top of that, we built this research assistant, which is slightly more complex, which is what I demoed, where we provided the web search and calculator tool and some instructions. And then we also have the safety check with LlamaGuard. So I can flag if there's unsafe content that's going into the model or coming out of the model, and basically kind of wrapping that in a little bit more of a loop based on the tool calls, getting responses, and the model kind of providing a final output. So that shows a little bit more of a complex example. This is all just kind of like fairly vanilla line graph, I would say. The main things that we're kind of hooking into the toolkit is, again, those core capabilities that I mentioned for retrieving a model and checking the settings. So you can see we're checking settings for some other API keys if we wanted to configure some additional tools, and then making it really easy to get the model that's being used using this get model that's kind of wrapping, whether it's OpenAI or Grok or Anthropic or what, it can retrieve the right model to call the LLM when the agent's running. So yeah, I think that's sort of a lot of the core source code. I mentioned the Docker setup, so we've got Docker files here for the app and the service, pretty straightforward, and a compose file for kind of setting up and running those. So I'll demo that in just a second. I did highlight the test coverage, so I've built out a bunch of integration tests and tests for the different functionality. So that allows you to very easily test out changes. So this will just work. We're doing some live demoing here. Yeah, so you can see 47 tests ran, or 47 tests, 45 of them ran. There's a couple of integration tests that require some specific Docker setup. Yeah, so those run in CI, but you can see everything else is looking good. So that's great. Okay, let's show what happens when you actually want to run this with Docker and make some changes. So I'm going to just do Docker compose watch. So it's going to spin up a couple of containers for me here, and then it's going to be watching for changes to the source code, which will refresh those, which will allow us to actually edit the application and see changes. So you can see that's running now, and I should be able to go back to localhost 8501 and get basically the same interface, but running locally now instead of hosted. I'm also going to try, I wonder if this will work, actually just calling one of the endpoints directly. Yeah, nice, that worked, great. So you can see I can call the service with that info endpoint, and it's giving me back the agents that are configured and the models. So in this case, I do have an Anthropic API key on my local environment. So those Claude models are there, which we didn't see on the hosted version. And again, this is kind of what's populating the settings and the information in the sidebar. So that's sort of the first thing that runs when this app loads. Okay, so let's try modifying some code here and see how this works. So just to show kind of how simple it is to iterate, I can take the Streamlit app and add an inline thing here. And we can see that restarted and has updated in my app. Okay, that was a pretty boring example. Let's do something a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to try adding some instructions to the chatbot agent to get it to use emojis, because I love when LLMs use emojis. So right now, there are no extra instructions. It's just taking the initial message conversation and kind of passing that to the LLM. So I have implemented instructions for the research assistant. So let's try adding those here. So I can take my instructions. I can, whoops. And then basically add those to the pre-processing that's happening. So when it gets the incoming messages, it's going to create a system message with those instructions and prepend that at the beginning and pass that to the LLM. So I can add whatever instructions I like here. I am going to need to add system message. All right, and now I should be able to give the instructions that I want. You are a helpful chatbot. You know the user likes when you respond with emojis. Okay, so I think this should work. So just to show a before and after, I'm going to switch to the chatbot, and then I will say, can you share a joke with me? Okay, got my scarecrow joke. And now I should be able to save this, which will add those instructions. I can see that the service restarted in this case, not the app, but the service container. And I would expect, you tell me 3 more. I'm guessing that we're going to get, yeah, here's our emojis. So that worked. So you can see, yeah, how simple it was to make a tweak to the agent there and have all of the structure and everything available so that you don't need to set up the service. It all just kind of works, is nicely integrated, and you can build and go from there. So I think that's the end of my walkthrough. I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I wanted to cover. Yeah, I talked through the Python setup using UV, the Docker setup, a lot of the features. And there's also some information about contributing if you're interested. So welcome contributions. I didn't talk through the LangGraph Studio setup, but if you're interested in using LangGraph Studio to develop your agents with the IDE that's provided by LangChain, that is also nicely integrated. So there's a langgraph.json that's built in that kind of points to the right place. So you should be able to just launch it and point it at the repository after you clone it down, and that should just work. And yeah, be off to the races. So would love any more contributions. Please use the template. Thanks again to everyone who shared it and left great comments. And yeah, thanks so much. Hope you find this useful. And yeah, I'll talk to you on GitHub. Cheers.